Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone. My name is Riaz Kamlani and I work for the Citizens Foundation and I will be your moderator for the evening. We know we have people joining us from all over the world. So good morning to those of our friends coming in from North America. Good afternoon to those folks coming in from Europe. And good evening to our friends from the East. Today's discussion is about, let me get this right, mother tongue-based multilingual education, or in abbreviation, MTB-MLE. It's taken a lot of effort from my colleagues far more capable than I am to help me remember that. But in essence, this MTB-MLE conversation is about language. It's how it helps a person to truly learn from the world around and from his or her teachers. And in that process, find identity, find equity, and find economic strength. Now, this is particularly relevant for a country like Pakistan, where you have over 70 native languages. And in terms of our colonial legacy, there is this strong idea of quality equates English medium, because English opens the doors to power and privilege, to opportunity. But by virtue of that, for a large majority of children across Pakistan, what ends up happening is neither do they understand English, nor do they understand concepts. And they suffer for it through their life because their schooling is about rote memorization, through textbooks that it really cannot understand. Now, in this context, TCF partnered with the Thar Foundation in 2018, and what we developed is an MTB-MLE approach, particularly for Pakistan, with a particular focus for the Thar Parker Desert, where this company, where Sindh Agro Coal Mining and its affiliate Thar Foundation operates. Now, in this area of Thar, there are about 13 odd languages, include Hadki, Marwari, Kutchi, and it was a fascinating area to really understand what language diversity is all about. So today is really about understanding what the experience has been in Thar and what are its implications for Pakistan as well as in a global context. To have this discussion, we have with us an absolutely stellar line of speakers, and we have about next 50 minutes in which they will share their experiences and their perspectives. But one important thing about today's discussion will be that it will not be limited to only identifying what doesn't work. It will also provide detailed solutions to what ought to happen. And given that we have friends joining from all over the world, we will conduct this conversation in English, but any aspects that are spoken of in Urdu, we'll have subtitles going on. So with that brief introduction, let's get straight into it. Let me introduce and get on board our first two guests. Firstly, we have with us Ateed Riaz Sahab. Ateed Sahab is one of the co-founders of the Citizens Foundation and currently also serves as the chairman of the board. I think it would be fair to say that for many of us, he's a teacher and an elder, and not just at TCF, but also in the development sector. Joining Ateed Sahab is Sayyid Abul Fazl Rizvi Sahab. Rizvi Sahab is the Chief Executive Officer of Sindh Agro Coal Mining Limited and of the Thar Foundation. He's an engineer by training, has been with SCCMC for over 8 years, but my interactions with him, I found him to be passionate not just about the energy sector, but also about creating a very meaningful difference for people in Thar and for their well-being. So welcome, Rizvi Sahab.
Thank you very much, Riaz. Thank you.
Ji, so Ateed Sahab and Rizvi Sahab, Assalamu alaikum to both of you. Ateed Sahab, I'll start off with you. People know you, people know TCF. Now, as a founder of TCF back in 1995-96, when you and your co-founders started the organization, I know that you took a fundamentally different direction on language, which was against the tide of those times. And I know that that perspective has continued to evolve. So tell us about what that perspective was originally and how it has evolved since. Your voice is cracking. No, I think we're struggling to hear you. G. Sahab, I think if you try to reconnect with a different connection, I'll take the conversation with Rizvi Sahab first, and then I will come back to you. G. So Rizvi Sahab, I think when it comes to your collaboration with TCF for SCCMC, the Agro Coal Mining Company, there is a general perception that when corporates work with not-for-profit organizations, there is a preference for tangible assets, for brick and mortar buildings or hospitals or facilities to be built up. This particular project, where we talk about MTB-MLE, about the role of mother tongue, is a bit more amorphous. It's a bit abstract. It's strategic. It's got to do with real quality improvement, but it doesn't reflect in physical assets. So that's an unusual call, an unusual vision to support. Tell us what prompted you to work with this and how has that evolved since?
Okay, thank you, Riaz. You're absolutely right. When you look at various organizations in Pakistan, when they talk about CSR, they always talk about building a school or setting up a technical education center or some tangible asset, as you rightly said, because that gives them the most publicity per se. So just to give you a background, we have formed Section 42 company called Thar Foundation, whose sole purpose is to take care of the interests of the principal stakeholders of the Thar coal project, which are the people of Thar Parker. And to align our efforts with in CSR, we have chosen to adopt the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which the entire world is now familiar with, that we have to be aligned with them by 2030. So if you whenever we start an intervention in Thar, we talk about sustainability first. And the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is basically quality education for all, required that we set up a number of school units in Thar Parker, and TCF being one of the best education provider in the country, we collaborated with them and set up 3 large flagship schools, one in Mithi, one in Islamkot, one in Block 2, and they are being operated by the Citizens Foundation. The problem was identified 1 year into when we started the operations in Thar, when parents approached us and raised the issue that their kids were having problem understanding what they were being taught in school. And when we dug deep, we found out that most of the Thari people speak Dhatki, which is sort of a similar language of Sindhi. And that was the key reason why they had trouble understanding what was being taught in school. And that's when we collaborated again with your team, the TCF team, and we started this project of MTB and MLE to develop the curriculum and the required resources in local language to bring about a long-term change in the way the curriculum is being taught in places like Thar Parker. So I'm really grateful for TCF for joining hands with us. The foundation is funding the project, but it's all TCF's effort for developing the entire concept and the curriculum, and inshallah we'll see great results soon.
Thank you, Rizvi Saab. And I think the long-term impact that you're talking about, I think that's something that resonates with both organizations. And these are based on that long-term impact that I'd like to come to you, because that's what you and your co-founders had very clearly in mind, an impact that will outlast you. So when it came to language, what was the perspective that you started with? And now with this particular development, what are your hopes on that evolution going forward?
Well, we walked against the grain because the whole country was generally uproar in saying that everything should be English medium. But when we looked around, we saw our elders who were intellectually strong. They were all schooled in the then language, the local language, which is Urdu. We couldn't go the 17 or 25 language route at that point in time because we were, entrepreneurs, managers wanting to kick off the program and not educationists. But we looked at it from a paradigm of management. And we felt that these intellectually strong people, our elders and those around us, as well as those who had done well for Pakistan internationally. And I mean the physicist who got a Nobel Prize, the actor who went on to perform Shakespeare in the West End, the poet who started teaching, became a professor of English, the Urdu poet. They were all schooled in their native language, their language they could understand and comprehend at an early age. So we were quite sure that whilst people will speak against this, we must carry on in teaching children in a language that they speak at home or what is generally spoken in the country. And then when we looked internationally, we saw that all big civilizations were local language civilizations, whether the Chinese or the French or the Japanese or whatever. So we were quite sure, took a lot of flack initially, but grateful to everybody around us who supported us. And so off we went in the local language, and very grateful now to Sindh Angro Coal Mining that they've helped us research and develop a caveat, which is a very beautiful caveat, which is 1 to 3, teach them in really the language they speak at home or in their village, and then move on to the national language, and then move on to English. So very pleased with the way things are, and very grateful to our sponsors.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rizvi Saab and Atit Saab. I think this is the beginning of a partnership that's really made a significant impact in the whole landscape of this language quagmire, as we call it in Pakistan. So I think with gratitude to both of you for being with us today, I would like then to move the conversation forward to our audience to tell them the material details of what is exactly that's being done and what is being proposed. So thank you, both of you, for being with us today.
Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raz. Thank you very much.
So this collaboration, as we spoke, started in about 2017-18, but this collaboration has now gone on in about early 2020 to determine what research said, what kind of configuration needs to be there, and it's moved on to practice. So across 21 classrooms beginning early 2020, this MTB-MLE approach has now taken effect, where a combination of Jhatki and Sindhi is being used to teach very young children at a nursery and KG level. Let us take you across now to Thar to provide you a glimpse of what the reality on the ground is and a flavor for what this endeavor looks like.
What is the consonant? Please definition.
A consonant net sounding consonant such a letter which can be sounded with the help of a vowel or all the letter of the English language. Speed the vowel are called consonants.
For example, misal दो. ABC हो गया.
The child understood. I can't. As a facilitator, it was not our job to evaluate the child, but to learn and understand what's the problem. What is the problem over here? The problem is not limited to language, because the purpose of education is not language. The desert in itself has around 3,400 villages, and thereby the reality of what when they say is that after every 12 miles a dialect changes, that is so true for Tharparkar. TCF has always had schools in diverse parts of Pakistan, and especially the parts which have been inaccessible to a lot of private schooling and even government schooling. So the medium instruction was a very important question out there. And the recognition that the familiar language needs to be the main medium of instruction in the early years, and then gradually transition with TCF's understanding of continuous improvement. This has always been in the spirit of it, in the will of it. We've answered this question that education is about joy, is about learning, is about engagement. It can't happen in a language I don't understand. And a language I don't understand cannot be the beginning point.
आऊं ॿारनि खे जॾहिं पढ़ाईंदी आहियां क्लास में सिंधी छाकाणि त मुख़्तलिफ़ कम्यूनिटी जा ॿार आहिनि, के सिंधी में आहिनि, के ढाटकी में आहिनि, के उर्दू में आहिनि, त उर्दू पढ़ाइण में मूंखे मुश्किल आई, ॿार सुठे नमूने न सम्झी सघिया पिए ऐं हू पंहिंजी खुली करे इज़हार बि नथे करे सघिया। अगरि डिॼिया पे ॿार त असीं उर्दू असांखे अचे नथी, असां ॿारनि टीचर खां कुझु पुछंदा ऐं त हू टीचर असांखे कुझु चवे न, या ॿिया ॿार हुननि ते खिलंदा बि हुआ, ॿार अहिड़ा बि हुआ.
When the partnership happened with Thar Foundation, that's where the question re-emerged. What should be the medium instruction? Urdu did not make sense because that's not the familiar language. English is not the familiar language. Sindhi was the familiar language, or that was assumed so. And thereby the question came, can we do the research together?
Over here, what I was seeing in the schools that were being directly managed by Thar Foundation and the schools that were being managed by TCF, we saw that children were not understanding. So the purpose for which the schools were being created was not being accomplished. We were not achieving our targets. So then that was the time. Citizens Foundation, they had a whole team, experts rather, who came over here and they gathered all the teachers of mother tongue based multilingual education, from trainings to online trainings to in-person trainings to providing material to the textbooks. Everything has been done by this group of experts that have been sent by the Citizens Foundation to train these teachers.
Alif, Amba, A. Alif, Amba.
हींअर जॾहिं असां पंहिंजी उन्हनि जी ज़बान में जॾहिं पढ़ाईंदा आहियूं त उन्हनि खे ॾाढी ख़ुशी थींदी आहे ऐं जेको शइ जल्दी सम्झी बि वेंदा आहिनि ऐं हिकिड़ो टाइम बि माना घटि खपंदो आहे, थोरे घणे टाइम में बि उहो शइ माना क्लियर थी वेंदी आहे. लाज़मी जेको आहे मादरी ज़बान पढ़ाइणु खपे. मादरी ज़बान जेकॾहिं न पढ़ाईंदा त हुननि जी जेको ॿोली आहे उनजो सफ़ा ख़ात्मो थी वेंदो, ॿोली जेको पोइ ते रहिजी वेंदी आहे, आहिस्ते आहिस्ते हुन ॿोली जो पाड़ पटिजी वेंदी, ख़तमु थी वेंदी.
Right now what we are doing is we are implementing the material, that the syllabus, just in the kindergarten section and the nursery sections. So the medium of instruction is totally Dhatki and Sindhi in KG and nursery for both the Thar Foundation schools, TCF managed and Thar Foundation managed, and the rest is the same. I can vouch that if this system is truly implemented in its letter and spirit, and if the children are given the opportunity that they truly deserve, this can be actually a very big success story for the whole of Sindh.
ढाटकी में एक चवणी आहे त देश छॾे वेस छॾे पर आपरी ॿोली न छॾे.
You can abandon everything but not your native language. That's at the core of what we're talking about today. Our next guest is Ajay Pinjani, the young man that you saw in the video. He's associated with TCF, is an Acumen Fellow, a deep thinker, a good friend. Welcome, Ajay.
Thank you, Reza.
Good to see you, Ajay.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
The work that you've done, it's now over to you for the next 10 odd minutes to talk us through what you did, what you learned with your team. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you. So I would love to go through the presentation and thereby talk about what we learned, and not individually, but together. So, this is our team, these 6 members, and aside from that, there have been many other members, 15 plus volunteers, the team which is right now implementing the mother tongue based multilingual education project. I'd like to thank everyone and thank everyone else who believes in this. It should be equally important that when the teaching of English has begun, it should not be prematurely employed as the medium of instruction in other subjects. This statement has been taken from the Indian Education Policy 1904. In terms of research and in terms of common knowledge, not much has changed. The benefits of beginning with the mother tongue have been known. So what we wanted to understand, where is the gap? And the gap we found was that majority students still in Pakistan and many other similar contexts are taught in an unfamiliar language, which they do not understand. The first step we took was to understand the child-centered approach. We wanted to move the mother tongue discussion, which is generally politically or identity driven, we wanted to understand what is mother tongue. And what we found, the significance is of familiar language, especially in the primary years, where the child's most familiar language is the most meaningful journey the child already has. Then we wore the practitioner's hat, and we tried to understand what is the journey a child takes in a school. Often, a child enters our school at the age of 4, 5, 6, with a lot of cultural repertoire, a lot of knowledge, a lot of familiarity, which is because of their mother tongue. At the age of 16, when they pass grade 10 and beyond, we want them to leave with certain capacity in English, in Urdu, in languages, which gives them exposure, which allows them academic, career, personal, and professional growth. What we found in UNICEF documents and elsewhere, this is called mother tongue-based multilingual education. What we understood that a ladder is possible. We wanted to understand how will we develop a ladder which is contextual for Pakistan and other local contexts. The research team entered into primary and secondary sources. We were very lucky to find wonderful experts, practitioners, a lot of publications who already endorse what we are trying to find and share over here. We also carried out a social linguistic survey, met parents, met teachers, met students, tried to understand their current reality, their aspirations, and we also studied models which were globally contextually relevant to Pakistan, which practiced mother tongue-based multilingual education. One of the first findings was that there are three possibilities. One possibility in the primary year is that the child begins learning subjects like science, mathematics, social studies in their most familiar language. The bridge becomes easier. The second possibility is a less familiar language, often known as common language or a national language, and it is a problem for some, and for some, they may be able to pass it. However, the biggest challenge is in the primary years when I'm taught mathematics, science, and other subjects in an unfamiliar language, and I'm asked to cross this bridge. It becomes very, very challenging. As we've seen in the video, you'll see everywhere else, it becomes very challenging, not only for the student, but also for the teacher. The research, what we found, in the primary years, the benefits were not limited to only the social benefits, but the purpose. If the purpose is around building the foundation of the child, then it is very important to begin with the familiar language. The child is able to understand, the child is able to comprehend, and thereby the child is able to express. Once they're able to express their self-esteem, their understanding of their own identity, the entire cultural repertoire, which is built in their familiar language, especially in the early years, they respect their culture, they respect themselves, they respect their parents. And the third, where we are most concerned today about what will happen to English, what will happen about English, the research clearly states that if you have a very strong foundation in your own language, learning the other languages becomes easier. This is not said by us alone, it's said by many, many organizations which are there on the slide. We also saw certain examples. We saw over 12 examples, contextual ones, and I'm sharing 2 examples over here from global experience. Both of them and the others had something common. The common thing was that English as a medium of instruction was not introduced in the early years, and the second language, be it the national language or in certain cases the other language, becomes the medium instruction only after grade 3 or grade 6. Now we see Nepal, we see India. Nepal is a 3-language context where there are 6 mother tongues and then the national and then the English. Similarly in India, there are 10 mother tongues, something similar to Tharparkar over here, and then language 1, then Hindi, then English. We have a similar experience as we see. So what we understood and what we propose, that there are schooling has to be seen in 3 stages. The stage between preschool to grade 3. This is important for building the foundation. English, Urdu, other unfamiliar languages can be introduced as language subject, however, not converted into a medium of instruction. Grade 4 to 7 is quite a journey where really transitioning can take place through bilingual books, bilingual materials, bilingual teaching practices, where the unfamiliar language can become more familiar. And then when you come to grade 8 and the aspirations for the larger world, the access, the language I'm speaking to you right now, if that is to be possible, we strengthen those and make English or Urdu the medium of instruction for certain subjects. What we understood was that there are guiding principles. We may not say a model is similar for Tharparkar, similar for other parts of Sindh, or similar for other parts of Pakistan, but certain guiding principles stand true. One of the major guiding principles is that the benefits of the most familiar language in the primary years are beautiful and aspiring. The second, if a language is unfamiliar, at least teach it as a language subject first for 5 to 8 years and then transition to making it a medium of instruction. We developed 16 such guiding principles and they are presented in the report. Now it's a glimpse of a ladder for Tharparkar. It's very crowded over here, but there are 4 points. One of the major points is begin with the most familiar language, in this case, Dhatki and Sindhi. The second is there is tremendous capacity and advantage of linguistic proximity. Sindhi and Dhatki, according to certain sources, are 80% similar. So one can use that to our benefit. Then comes Sindhi as a medium of instruction, given that it's the most familiar language in the region. And then a gradual transition into other languages, being English and Urdu, and they become language of the subjects like mathematics, science, and others later in the years. What does this mean for English? We often ask ourselves, a language of international communication, knowledge, power, and privilege. Are we depriving these students of what we aspire? Certainly not. The case is very, very clear that right now, if I'm studying maths and science in a language I'm struggling with, then I'm struggling with the language in mathematics and in science. If my foundation is clearly built and English has been gradually endorsed in, I can strengthen English as well as native languages. Last but not the least, what we understood and learned is that language, while a very important decision, if it's the only decision we've made and not taken into consideration the consent by parents, community engagement, if we've not taken into consideration the teaching and learning material is contextual, relevant, and capacity has been built of teachers to teach languages and subjects effectively, we will struggle. So we need to take all of these steps together. I hope you'll join us in this initiative, and we really look forward to learn from each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. Couple of comments. I mentioned to you right at the beginning that we won't be just talking about problems. We'll be talking about solutions. And the language ladder that Ajay showed is a very specific, clear example of how through this approach, a managed, a structured transition is possible, where it's not about Sindhi or Urdu or English. It is about Sindhi and Urdu and English. And it's in the child's benefit. Secondly, this is a very young team. This young man that you see here is probably the eldest of the lot. And I've had a ringside seat to observe how they have evolved in the process. And this increases your conviction in the youth of this country. So they've done a wonderful job. Bless you, Ajay, and bless your team. Thank you.
Thank you.
So moving along, we now have a message from somebody who many of you would be acquainted with, Zubaida Mustafa Sahiba. Zubaida Sahiba is a journalist, is a very renowned journalist. We often read her articles in Dawn. She's also the author of a book titled The Tyranny of Language, and that's been a real strong reference document, a resource document for people working in language. She's been a strong, passionate supporter for this campaign for Mother Tongue, and she sent us a message. She's been supporting our study throughout, and we'd like for you to hear what she has to say about it, and particularly about its implications for the province itself.
TCF की ज़बान के हवाले से जो रिपोर्ट है उसकी बहुत अहमियत है। उसका जो टाइटल है उसी से ज़ाहिर होता है कि ज़बान की क्या अहमियत होती है किसी शख्स के, ख़ास तौर से एक तालिब इल्म की ज़िंदगी में। रिपोर्ट का टाइटल है फाइंडिंग आइडेंटिटी, इक्विटी एंड इकोनॉमिक स्ट्रेंथ। क्योंकि यानी यही चीज़ें हैं जिनका ज़बान का असर पड़ता है, और TCF की रिपोर्ट ने इस पर सर्वे किया इन मामलात पर, और वो इस नतीजे पे पहुंची कि ये अहम है कि बच्चे को उसको अपनी ज़बान में पढ़ाया जाए। और कहने को तो है कि ये तो सब लोग जानते ही हैं, लेकिन हम लोग के यहाँ तो ऐसा नहीं हो रहा। और TCF ने इस लिहाज से ये बहुत ही उम्दा काम किया है। जो ये पहला कदम है, ये मेरे ख्याल में बहुत अहम है बच्चों के लिहाज से और उनकी तालीम के लिहाज से, क्योंकि इसी तरह बच्चा जो है जब वो अपनी ज़बान में स्कूल जाएगा, सीखेगा, तो वो यानी जो जिसे हम लोग रोट कल्चर कहते हैं उससे अलग होगा और उसकी तालीम बेहतर होगी। और इसको अगर हम सिंध के हवाले से देखें, जहाँ पे TCF का ये पहला कदम उठाया गया है, ये तो मेरे ख्याल में बहुत ही खुशाइन बात है, क्योंकि यहाँ पे जो TCF के स्कूल्स हैं वो अभी तक उर्दू में पढ़ा रहे थे। और मेरी एक नन्ही मुन्नी दोस्त जो खैरो डेरो में रहती है, सितारा उसका नाम है, और मैं उससे साल 2 साल पे मिलती रहती हूँ, वो अब स्कूल जाने लगी है, लेकिन ज़बान की वजह से कुछ परेशानी रहने लगी है, क्योंकि वो सिंधी बोलती है और स्कूल में उर्दू है। तो अब TCF ने जब ये कदम लिया है और उन्होंने ये भी कहा है कि अब सिंध के तमाम स्कूलों में जहाँ पे सिंधी बोलने वाले लोग रहते हैं, उनके बच्चों को पढ़ाया जाता है, वहाँ सिंधी ज़रिया तालीम वो कर देंगे अपने स्कूलों में। और मुझे उम्मीद है कि बाकी मुल्क में भी इससे कुछ सबक हासिल करेंगे लोग, और जो वहाँ पे स्कूल्स हैं और सूबों में वो भी इसी उसूल पर पाबंद होंगे कि बच्चे को उसकी अपनी ज़बान में तालीम की इब्तिदा हो और फिर और ज़बानें धीरे धीरे करके उसको सिखाई जाएं, क्योंकि यही एक बेहतरीन तरीक़ा है बच्चे को सिखाने का।
The issues that we've spoken thus far about, particularly to Thar, they're not limited to Thar. They resonate across Pakistan and perhaps across the globe. And moving on, we now have experts for you from the field, from many different parts of the world, who will come around and share their views and experiences with us. First of all, we're privileged to have with us Dr. Stephen Walter. Dr. Walter holds a PhD in linguistics, is a member of faculty at the Dallas International University. He's consulted with World Bank, UNESCO, UNICEF, many other organizations, and he has designed and led MTB-MLE rated projects in various parts of Africa and Asia, including Eritrea, Cameroon, Vietnam, Pakistan, China, Peru. So it's been all over on this topic. Something we've experienced as part of this study is generosity from people around the world. Anyone we've approached for their knowledge, for the support, hasn't said no. And Dr. Walter is one of those who's been very generous with his time and support and with his knowledge. So welcome, Dr. Walter.
Thank you. Right.
Glad to have you with us. Dr. Walter, I know you've been backstage and you've been listening to what Ajay was talking about, what the earlier speakers referred to. Now, your profile and your experience spans many countries across Africa and Asia. So you've really dealt with this issue in many different contexts. Based on your experience on seeing many global shades of this, whatever has been spoken about by Ajay and by the other colleagues, does it resonate? Is it supported by global research, or are we on the wrong path?
Okay, I'd like to first say that in listening to Ajay, that he sounded very much like I do when I'm lecturing my students in my course on multilingual education. The experiences that are being described, or that I'm listening to, the perspectives that I'm listening to this morning, are very familiar to me. They've been a part of my professional experience for the last 20 years, and they very much represent what I've learned in being involved with educational projects in developing countries around the world. I want to congratulate the Citizens Foundation, TCF, for the kind of thinking that they have done, the research that they have done, and for the, I'll call it the experimental activity that they anticipate in Pakistan, in Tharparkar province. I read again last night the research report that the TCF had prepared and published, and several things came to my mind. as I was reading through the report. These are primarily, I would call them below the surface insights that I have gained over the years. Some of them are more dramatic than others, but they do express, I think, some of the values. They capture some of the values, or the value of multilingual education, mother tongue-based multilingual education. One of the things that I've observed repeatedly in the assessment work that I've done in so many countries is that the classroom dynamics are very different when teachers are teaching in the language that the children understand. The kids are more involved, they're more engaged, they learn quicker. And one of the problems that I've seen that new experiences, new programs in multilingual education have had to deal with is training the teachers to cope with the fact that the children are actually learning. So often I've seen teachers lecturing and the children are sitting stone-faced, uncomprehending, not paying attention. And the teacher assumes that that's normal, that that's the way education happens. The children are not learning. When the children are learning, it's a whole different environment for the teachers. And the teachers have to learn that education is very different when children are learning than when they're not. And it's a new experience for teachers. Most of them have never seen that. They've never experienced that in their lives. So the Children's Foundation or the Citizens Foundation will need to support their teachers and learning how to function in a classroom where the teachers are the children are actually learning and at a rapid pace. Another point that I wanted to make is, and I first became aware of this in my experience in Eritrea in Africa. Multilingual education or mother tongue education is a very effective educational strategy, but it's not a magic bullet. That is, good education still requires work. It still requires good materials. It still requires support on the part of the administrative organization to the teachers. And you have to have committed teachers who know what they're doing. Simply using the mother tongue doesn't solve all problems. There's still work to be done to make education effective. A thought that came to mind from when reading the report last night about the survey that TCF did in Tharparkar province reminded me of an experience that I had in Cameroon. We did a very similar survey in Cameroon when we were initiating a mother tongue education project there. And one of the things that I learned through that experience was the teachers or the parents were telling us, we want our children to learn English. And English was the official policy there. And I thought to myself, why are they saying that when they know that most of their children are not going to succeed in school when they're being taught in English? And after the first year of implementation of the mother tongue program, when we again interacted with teachers, I came to realize the teachers or the parents want what is best for the children. They just don't know how to go about achieving it. So one of the things that I think is important for TCF in communicating with the community and engaging with them is helping parents understand that using the mother tongue may in fact, or will in fact, get them further towards their goals for their children than what they had understood or what they had realized. And that's very important in terms of the support from the parents. Another point that I want to pass on, especially to the Citizens Foundation, is one that really became real to me in my recent research project or assessment project in East Timor. I was observing teachers in the classrooms interacting with educational officials, supervisors, etc. And one of the things that I came to realize, the teachers did not recognize when learning had or had not taken place. They understood their role as simply presenting content, and they assumed that the kids were learning. And they could not tell the difference between when a child had learned and when the child had not learned. So that needs to be a part of the training process for the teachers to develop that sense. When are the kids learning, or when have they learned? And if they have not learned, then what steps do I need to take to correct myself and make my instruction more effective? Similar point, I've seen this everywhere I've been, in every project. Education is not just for the bright kids. Education is for all kids. So many teachers have come to accept from their own experience and from what they have observed that it's only the bright kids that are going to succeed. But all kids can succeed, or at least most of them will, when taught in their mother tongue. So that's simply a perspective on education and classroom practice that teachers need to take.
Wonderful, Dr. Walter. I think this really reflecting on what you're saying, a couple of big things emerge. Firstly, this is the beginning of a journey. As you rightly said, there is a significant effort that needs to happen with teachers, not just in terms of helping them how to teach, but also how to understand and check for learning, and a significant component of community and parental engagement. Also, given the examples that you're talking about, I was just reflecting that we might be very different across the world, but some of the challenges are very, very similar. So it's, in some ways, it's good to know that there are many others around the world who are going through a similar journey. My question, the last question that I have with you, is your classic elevator speech. If you were to be with the Minister of Education in Pakistan in an elevator of 45 seconds, and you were to tell him this is what you ought to do when it comes to language choices at school, what would that be? What would be the crux of your policy recommendation to the public policymakers here?
Okay, I'm not sure I caught all of that. Can you repeat the question?
I was just saying that this is, if you had a 45-second engagement with the Minister of Education in Pakistan and you had to distill your recommendation to him,
okay,
that this is what ought to happen, what would be the recommendation to policymakers?
Okay, I made a few notes. One of them, this is based on, again, my experience of regularly having to report to ministers of education or officials in the World Bank or whatever agency is interested in or has been sponsoring an educational project. One of the points that I regularly have had to make, especially in the early phases of reporting results from a mother tongue education project, is don't jump to conclusions. Don't jump to preliminary conclusions about what is or is not good policy. And I think especially there in terms of children's progress in learning a second or a third language. And at official levels, there's a very common perception or belief that children are going to emerge from the first or second year of a mother tongue project speaking Portuguese or German or French or whatever the second or third language happens to be. But language learning takes time, especially when it's being taught as a subject. And probably even more so when it's being used as a language of instruction without having been taught as a subject. So educational officials have to be patient in terms of the measurement of some of the markers of progress. Children may make exceptional progress in something like learning to read or math, but in other areas they will make less progress. And education officials have to realize that some educational innovations take time to produce results.
I think that's such an astute and apt observation, the need for patience. And I think on that note, I think the need for patience is something to really underscore. So on that note, Dr. Walter, it's been wonderful having you with us, and thank you for taking the time, and thank you for your support for this whole show. Really.
Thank you. And I'm impressed with the project and hope that it's successful.
Thank you, sir. So this was a global perspective by somebody who's worked across the globe. Our next speaker brings a rather different perspective. The next speaker is Nadia Naviwala. Nadia is a non-resident fellow for the Woodrow Wilson Center. She's published in various publications, The Economist, New York Times, etc. She's also done a study which is titled "Why Can't Pakistani Children Read?" And she's a colleague who works part-time at TCF as well. I know Nadia well. I think the thing about her is that she's passionate. She's passionate about education. She's passionate about language. She's passionate about Pakistan. So welcome, Nadia.
Thank you, Riaz.
So Nadia, your study is titled "Why Can't Pakistani Children Read?" So tell us, why can't Pakistani children read?
Well, I think first is to establish that this is a reality, that the majority of your young children in Pakistan are in school. When we talk about out-of-school children, those children are older than 10 years old. So you have the majority of your small children in Pakistan in school. But amongst the children who have been in school for 3 years, your third graders, the majority of them cannot read a sentence in any language. And I had come across this as a data point, as a statistic. And when I would talk about education in Pakistan and say, you know, our kids can't read, we need to do something about this problem, about quality, people would say, well, why? Like, why is it that a child can be in school for a couple of years and yet can't even read a sentence? And I didn't have an answer for this problem, for this question. And I actually found that a lot of experts didn't have answers for this question either. So I ended up visiting schools all across Pakistan. And every time I'd go to school, I'd spend time in every classroom showing children their textbooks and asking them, you know, can you read this sentence? And I went to 100 classrooms. I'll just show you, I mean, a lot of things that have been said resonate so deeply with what I've seen, and I've just seen it so many times. But I'll show you one video clip from visiting a classroom in Sindh, actually. If
you're not fluent in English, then science is pretty much impossible to understand. Here are grade 9 students trying to read and explain a sentence from their textbook. It says, tapeworms live in the intestines of their vertebrate hosts.
Tapeworms live in the intestines of their vegetables host their body.
इसका मतलब क्या है?
इसका मतलब है कि जो भी बॉडी में ना उसमें वेजिटेबल्स वगैरह इसका टॉपिक है।
इसका मतलब ये जो वर्म्स है ना, इसका पीछे वाला स्पाइनल कार्ड है ना, वो नहीं होता। स्पाइनल कार्ड इसका नहीं होता।
अच्छा, okay.
ये अर्थवर्म्स है।
Okay. Remember, the sentence was, tapeworms live in the intestines of their vertebrate hosts. But the student just latched on to the word that he knew, vertebrate, and explained that. It's not just the students who don't speak English, it's also the teachers. Here's the science teacher for the students who I showed you earlier. I asked her to explain the same sentence from the textbook.
About plants.
Okay.
So this is a secondary school, and so these are class 9 students. And you have to realize that these are the best students. These are the students who have survived the education system. A secondary school teacher typically has more ability than, say, a primary school teacher. But this teacher doesn't know English, and this is very typical. I think one of the problems is that we imagine in Pakistan that, you know, children understand Urdu. I've been in the ministry in Peshawar and heard a minister say, you know, Peshawar mein to bachon ko Urdu aati hogi. And it's actually not true. In Peshawar, kids in schools very close to the ministry cannot even, I need translation to speak to them in Urdu because they only speak Pashto. And teachers don't speak English. I've talked to kind of, you know, some of the leading intellectuals in Pakistan and told them about this English problem. And they just said, why don't we just hire teachers who speak English? The reality is that in villages across Pakistan, people don't speak English. Like, Pakistan is just simply not an English-speaking country. The data tells us that 1% of Pakistanis speak English as a first language, 10% speak it as a second language. So you end up with a very absurd situation where from the moment a child steps into school, when they go to an English medium school, this only means that their books are in English. The teachers don't speak English, and no one around them, they don't hear English, so they never acquire the language. And the only logical conclusion to that situation is that you rote memorize and you rote memorize. And the absurdity becomes that it's not just English. In Peshawar, for example, in KP, kids, small children are showing up in school and given books in up to 4 languages. And they have multiple language subjects. So a 5-6-year-old is given books, who only speaks Pashto, is given a book in English, is given a book in Urdu, is given a book in Pashto, and even, and this is controversial because we have so much chaos that we don't even know our policies in education, is given a book in Arabic. So education, I mean, really looks like, it looks like madrasa. Because in both places, children are showing up and they're being coached to rote memorize languages that they don't understand. And the one language that they do understand, they're never taught to read and write.
Mm-hmm. So this is a deeply embedded issue, and we've talked about MTB-MLE and what the approach ought to be. But tell me something, having been on the ground, being passionate about this, how does this make you feel? And how do you see the future?
I forget, because it's been a little while, how I felt when I would come back from schools. And I mean, in Peshawar, I would literally go from spending a day in a primary school talking to a 2nd grader and then talking to 5th graders and asking them, can you read this from your book? And they, I mean, I showed a little boy his book, and it said, Abu or Chacha bachon ko park le gaye. But he could only read Abu or Chachi bach in the parki, and he just could not. And so I tried speaking to him in Urdu, asking, where do you live? What is it like? What do you like about Peshawar? And just completely stunted. Until you say, well, tell me in Pashto. And suddenly his eyes light up and he can tell me about how he plays hide and seek. And, it's a different child. And you realize that these language policies, this problem of the fact that we haven't even started to educate children in Pakistan. We're not even, if you're going to put a child in school and completely bewilder them and tell them that what you think has no place in the books, in your notebook. You don't get to say it, you don't get to write it, because intellect doesn't occur in Tatki. So unless you can say it in English, don't bother, because it's not education. And you're cognitively stunting this child. You're stripping them of their confidence. All of those things that happen to a child when they're young to build creativity, to build critical thinking, you're actually doing the opposite to them. And so I go to the education ministry quite angry. And I mean, I ran into someone, I'm not even going to say the exact words here because I think it's not appropriate, but, I ran into someone that I'd seen and I was just like, the people who are in charge of these policies deserve the worst punishment for what they have done to millions and millions of children across Pakistan. And I'll just add one thing to that, which is that it's not just the ministers and it's not just the people at the top. This is one of those weird, it's actually the only problem I can think of in Pakistan that we actually have control over. Because when politicians, and you've heard these single national curriculum debates recently in which language has come up, the politicians are listening to public opinion on this problem. They can't, the reason this is unresolved, they can't say Urdu because they get a huge lashback. They can't say English because they get a huge lashback. So what we believe as individuals, it actually shapes policy. And we have to understand, especially if you believe in English medium education, what language the child speaks, what language the teacher speaks, and what is the solution and the way out of this problem, and say it. Because this is actually, people are listening to this, and I think we do have the power to shape policy here by what we think and what we say about it.
Absolutely, Nadia. And I think what you said about children, I think their face lighting up when they understand. It resonates deeply. Thank you, Nadia, for taking the time for being with us today. Your work is wonderful. Bless you.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Dr. Farooq Bajwa. Farooq Saab holds a PhD in International Relations from London School of Economics. He's a barrister, he's an author. His book is titled Pakistan, A Historic and Contemporary Look. He has been working on promoting Punjabi, and he's been working on developing a series of Punjabi primers for that. So we would like to invite him over and hear from him on what the scenario is like for Punjabi.
Good evening.
Glad to have you with us from the UK today. Also, we heard about something about Thar, something about Sindh. Nadia reflected somewhat on KP and also on Sindh province. We haven't heard from Punjab. What's the scene on Punjab and what's the scene on Punjabi?
It's probably, thank you very much, Riaz. I have to say that Punjab is actually in the worst possible scene. The other three provinces in Pakistan at least pay lip service to some sort of mother tongue. So Sindhi as a subject is taught somewhere in Sindh. Pashto is taught, Balochi is taught. There isn't a single school really in Pakistan or in Punjab teaching Punjabi at all. So we have a strange dichotomy that Punjabi is a university subject now in the University of Punjab. So you can do a degree in Punjabi, but no child can actually study the language at school. So it's an extraordinarily depressing situation. And of course, these are historic reasons, cultural reasons. But a lot of Punjabis now have sort of the middle class urban Punjabis have almost internalized the fact that perhaps Urdu is their mother tongue rather than Punjabi. And I don't think that's unique to Punjab. Unfortunately, I see this in other small towns in other provinces of Pakistan as well. But it is I won't lie, it's a pretty bleak situation in Punjab.
So, as you rightly said, it's the most widely spoken language, and with TCF I travel right across, and you're right, Punjabi is the one language that you hear all over, but you don't find it in terms of the education landscape. When you're talking earlier, you did mention to me that this has a fascinating historical context to it, and that things are very different just a few miles from Pakistan across the border. Tell us a bit more about the history and about the practice across.
Well, I won't bore you too much with the history, but very briefly, we often forget just how big pre-partition Punjab was and what a military threat it was viewed by the British. So for a long time, the British actually just stopped past Delhi and didn't try to enter Punjab during the Sikh period. When eventually they did, they found a province which is the size of United Germany. So this is stretching almost from Delhi all the way to Peshawar, and during Ranjit Singh's time included the whole of Kashmir. So we're talking about a huge state. So what the British decided with their classic divide and rule is that the Hindu Punjabis would be told that your mother tongue is Hindi. The Sikhs were persuaded that Punjabi was theirs, of course, in the Gurmukhi script, and that in a way has saved Punjabi and the Sikhs because of their religious link to their Granth Sahib, their holy book. And the Muslim Punjabis were told your actual language is Urdu. It's not Punjabi at all. And over time, it's literally created three Punjabs. So the old undivided Punjab has now become the Indian state of Haryana, the Indian state of Punjab, and the Pakistan state of Punjab. And it's the 9th or 10th most widely spoken language in the world. And extraordinarily is not taught in a single school in Pakistan.
Fascinating and slightly depressing, but
yes.
I think there's so much to be done. And what you're saying really draws out that this is an issue that is not restricted to one part of the country. It's prevalent right across. So thank you so much, Farooq sir, for joining us. Sorry, we're saying something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the dialogue that we've had today has been understandably wide-ranging, and it requires a summing up as we come to the close. And more importantly, a drawing out. It requires a drawing out of key conclusions, implications, and challenges. A And that's a difficult task. And we've kept our last guest, a special guest for that particular task, Dr. Faisal Bari. Dr. Bari is the interim dean for the School of Education at LUMS. He's a research fellow at Ideas, another think tank. He's somebody who understands ground realities based on his extensive experience, and I know has a very sharp mind and a great heart. Welcome, Faisal.
Thank you very much, Riaz. That's very kind of you. What a lovely conversation to hear. Absolutely.
I think we've, as I said, we have a stellar lineup and we've heard and learned so much. So based on all that you've heard today, as Nadia said, this is not just about policymakers. It's not just looking at the top and saying, you're doing something wrong. It's policymakers, it's educators and practitioners, it's public at large. What do you think are the implications for all of these constituencies?
So 4 or 5 things. One, I think it's very clear, and a lot of people have been saying this, and I think TCF really, by doing this study, has put this squarely, at least on the radar, if not on the policy agenda as of now, that this progression from mother tongue to other languages is very important to get right. The getting it right might be different in different areas, city versus rural, different provinces, etc., etc. But getting it right is very important, and we should definitely be striving for that. That might require some decentralization, devolution, localization, giving more freedom to schools and school systems. But I think that that conclusion is very much now and should be on the policy radar, at least for the first few years, getting to mother tongue, whether even if it's verbal. So I very much take on Bajwa Saab's point about Punjabi. One of the problems we have is with the script also, that not too many people in Punjab can read Punjabi scripts as well. But but their language is nonetheless Punjabi, which is spoken. So using oral also in some ways it is a challenge, but in the early years, starting with oral and producing that small amount of written work and using then transitioning is not that difficult if the power of the state and private sector come together. I think there are tremendous advantages to this. As I was listening to the webinar, I was coming up with things that were important to point at. One, I mean, TCF, if you remember, we've talked a number of times about it, how difficult it is to find teachers in various areas, especially areas that are more distant from larger cities and universities, places, etc. If you do move to local languages in the initial years, using a local teacher becomes easier as well. Supporting them, training them, that will allow for much more community interaction and a lot more support for children, parents, as well as the teacher. So I think there's a very strong point to be made that if local languages also allow you to localize teaching, which is very important to create that environment that you want to do for the children. These are very young children we are talking about. I think the point that Professor Walter made is very important one, that one of the biggest questions we have is that intra-class variation is very large in most classes in Pakistan. So if you analyze any examination results that we have, we find that intra-class, within the class variation between those who are doing academically very well and those who are struggling, that difference, which I call the left tail. So how do you squeeze the left tail? I think moving to local language, mother tongue, allows that squeezing also to happen, because I think the interaction, as Professor Walter was saying, children then learn faster, they learn quicker, they learn better. So if that happens, we will find that the left tail can be managed better as well, and which can be a huge payoff, because that's a real problem. It morphs into a dropout problem also very, very, very quickly for us. Where I see a real challenge, though, from the conversation, so a lot of these things, even prior to TCF study, have been in the air, right? We've been talking about this for a long time, which is the reason why partially you were experimenting with this as well. And that is the political aspect of it. Professor Walter pointed this out, that parents have a preference for English. And if you say we are going to teach in mother tongue, do parents then say, are you letting our children go and restricting them from moving forward and moving up in the world by having access to Urdu and English, where most jobs we know and most international education and other things are in English and in English largely internationally, but jobs in Pakistan rely sometimes on Urdu as well. So what has to be demonstrated is a real consistent high quality teaching of languages that shows parents, because it's not an argument that you can win without demonstration, that look, doing early years in mother tongue and then transitioning across does not mean giving up on languages. In fact, to the contrary, the child learns better, and that will translate into learning English and Urdu better as well as languages, and the transition becomes easier. That needs to be demonstrated. Without demonstration, I think the pushback that Nadia also talked about, Nadia Nabiwala also talked about, this will keep happening. Parents might push back against any policy that says from the government, even if the government were to agree. For the moment, it's hard to see that also. But even if the government were to agree, there might be some pushback from parents saying, you are condemning the public school and the low-fee private school to local language education, while the high-fee private schools are continuing with English, and so are you, or further sort of exacerbating the inequities in the system. Tied to this, I think the last point that I'll make, Riaz, is there's an identity and national project sort of conversation that is tied into this perception conversation as well. And I think that's very important. We see Urdu as a national language, and it's been an identity project also. It's not just about that this is, I mean, clearly Urdu has been made the national language. We know that this has been an issue since 48, when it was initially declared as the national language, and there were problems with East Pakistan. But those issues, some of those are still continue. So if you are tying religion, national identity, national narrative with a language also, then to have a language policy in education that can somehow not talk to that problem of the national identity issue is then very hard to do. So either we are able to disentangle them and separate them out and say, okay, look, this is about learning of children, this is about their future, this is about that. That conversation has to be in other spheres and not complicate the education policy area, at least. I don't know, very honestly, how that can happen actually. And that's a project which is way above my pay grade, but that conversation needs to happen in Pakistan about trying to separate these out and see them as separate conversations that we need to have.
I think Faisal, probably no one else would have summarized it and brought this together as well as you have. The challenges, as you rightly said, very real on the politics of it and the issues around national identity, but the possibilities around structuring a transition that is possible with local staff, a change which is connected to the ground and sustainable, and where intra-class differences can actually be addressed as well. So the possibility of a concerted long-term view is there, and I think here's to hope that we can find a better way of doing this. Thank you, Faisal, for taking the time to share with us. Sure.
Thank you very much.
So thank you everyone for joining in. That was our session for today. We hope that you found the conversation as good as I did. It's learned a lot, and I think many aspects were very thought-provoking. What is clear is that the issue of language is fundamental to how children learn. And as Nadia said, as Faisal said, as other speakers said, that it is not simply about the policymakers. It is about each one of us. And we hope that as you walk away, that you would lend your voice for changing this misplaced narrative. And you would do that within your sphere of influence, because that's something that we all can do. On that note, thank you everyone for your time and support, and we hope to see you soon again.